Hello, Coach Smeal here. I just wanted to say hello to everybody. The other day, I had a tweet exchange about arm health and the transitions between seasons with one of our baseball well-known, whatever word we want to call him. I like to call him a friend, a great well-known guy in the baseball community, Mr. Alan Jaeger of Jaeger Sports. Today, we're gonna talk about a topic that I'm super passionate about, something that I live and breathe every day. As a high school coach and also as a father of a freshman pitcher. I'm a huge supporter of Alan's methods. Have done his J-bands and arm circles for years with kids. Still wear one of his breathe bracelets from a long time ago at a convention I got from him, and the year-round throwing manual. I know he'll probably yell at me for showing it, but it's not too far from my desk ever. So with that, again, just super excited to be joined today by Alan. We're going to take a deeper dive into some of these topics and some of these questions that we had around the tweet the other day. Hopefully we get, if time permits, we're going to take a look at long toss and talk a little bit about the mental game. So with that, I'd like to welcome Alan, and then we're going to jump right into a question.
Hey man, Steve, number one, so glad that this happened. I just love the fact that it happened organically. You throw a tweet out there about a very, very important topic, obviously. And the fact that you and I have a history, the fact that we, I don't know if it was 6 or 8 months ago, and you were really trying to break down your son's fall or winter, I believe, and kind of navigating it. The fact that you already had the mindset of doing like a 52-week schedule, which is ironic because, of course, we have the year-round throwing manual. So it just couldn't have worked out any better this way. And I'm really looking forward to doing more of a deeper dive because, as you know, there are so many questions out there. There's so much ambiguity about this topic. I just, in my mind, the idea of like trying to answer just about any question that could come up excites me. And so anyway, I'm looking forward to just diving in, buddy.
Absolutely. Well, hey, let's jump right into it with the first one then. So what should a pitcher do that's just coming off of a long season, but he still wants to pitch in the summer?
Yeah, so it's a good place to start. As you know, we've talked about this, and I tweeted this out the other day too. You always have to just start with listening to your arm and listening to your body. So no matter what, that is always going to be the first box to check. And I think the thing with that is that people will think more in terms of, okay, how do I feel now based on the last couple, 3 months? And that's where you should start. But I think if you're honest with yourself and you really go back to the last 6 months and really even the last 9 months, what happens is you start to see a pattern one way or the other. You either see that you've been throwing a ton leading into the spring and then a lot in the spring, or maybe you haven't thrown that much and then you had a heavier spring. So they're two different scenarios completely. In the first scenario, where you've just thrown a ton and now you really are tired, not just because of the spring, but really because more of the 6 to 9 months, that tells me that you probably are in a position to start to go into a deload, start to back off, maybe go into some rest period, and then just sort of figure out what the next step is. When do you want to rebuild back up, whether that's into the summer, late into the summer, or back into the fall? That's sort of the one big scenario. The other big scenario is that you haven't done that much throwing for the last 6 to 9 months. And even if you had a medium to heavy spring, we're talking about 3 months of pitching. And in my mind, it sort of gives me the feel that you might be a little bit tired, but you're really still in great form. And if you have things coming up in the summer pretty quickly, I'd almost say just kind of keep going. But here's where this discussion is going to get interesting in the next hour or so, which is the bottom line is that we're painting two broad scenarios, but there's nuances even within these really basic scenarios. And so even in the case where someone hasn't thrown that much this spring and they're a little tired, but they could keep going, well, the question then is, yeah, but you could keep going, but then maybe your high school coach or college coach on September 1st wants you in certain kind of shape. Well, then that creates a whole nother set of variables that we can obviously discuss. So I would just say, for starters, listen to your arm, listen to your body. just know if it wants to rest or rest a little or rest a lot, start the deloading process. If it feels strong and wants to keep going, then maybe you just keep rolling right through into the summer, mindful of, but what does September 1st look like, October 1st, December 1st? Because you have to project more than just into the summer. So let's start there.
Absolutely. And we hear listen to the arm a lot. You got one or two other things or maybe cues that we can kind of give to a player of things that they should maybe be aware of, obviously soreness or other things, but is there any cue that what really listening to the arm is?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Steve, because it can be very ambiguous to somebody listening to the arm. What does that really mean? And I think for me, what it means is it's more of an intuitive, instinctive state. It's not where you want to be. You know, like you might want to keep pitching this summer, or you might have a big showcase coming up in August. But that may not be where you really are at. So I think listening to your arm, listening to your body is really more of an honest evaluation from an intuitive and instinctive place. You know, how do I really feel? Not how do I want to feel, because we want to probably feel like throwing year round and pitching year round if we could, without any consequences of that. So I think it just comes down to just a really honest self-evaluation. And because a lot of times, based on the amount of throwing you do, it would make sense that you should be tired, but you may not be. And then the flip side could be true, right? You may not have thrown that much, and it seems like you should keep going, but for some reason, you know, maybe you threw a little bit too much that last start or two. Who knows? So it's just I guess it was a really simple answer. It's a really honest evaluation by listening to your instincts, your intuition, and your body.
We take a scenario that we could probably run through real quick here.
Sure.
We got just say a high school or a college pitcher that's kind of ending their season here. They've got 3 to 4 weeks, just say in general, leading up to summer ball, which is pretty much that tweet the other day. So the high school would be summer ball, you know, travel stuff. The college would be maybe a summer team somewhere, right? But so they've got that 3 to 4 weeks. What are some of the things that they should be doing in that 3 to 4 weeks that maybe they're not thinking about doing?
And is this based on a pitcher who had a pretty heavy workload in the spring?
Let's just say medium workload, just kind of stay in the middle with it. So if it's a starting pitcher, he had his normal innings. If it's a relief guy, they had their normal stuff. They had a pretty good buildup in the fall. So they're really just in this 3 to 4 week kind of lull right here. And they're getting ready to go into that getting ready to go into that summer season.
Gotcha. So I would just say this: if a pitcher feels like they're, let's say, relatively strong, we'll stay down the middle, right? They're not tired, but they're not you know, they're not unused either. You know, I would say that stay in shape, stay in great shape. So let's say, as an example, you're built up to 90 pitches, right? You've got as far as throwing 90 pitches in a game. It is maybe even your last start. And you still feel relatively strong. I would say go a little bit into a deload mode, which to me just basically means do the same amount of work you're doing, maybe minus 10 or 20%. You know, maybe don't go out quite as far with your long toss. I'd say more, not so much not as far as your long toss, but start to back off maybe your intents on your pull downs. I might also have someone back off the intent on their mound work. But look, the reality of it is this: if you're in 4 weeks supposed to throw 90 pitches again, or even let's say 60 pitches again, you need to stay close. So when I say deload, it might be 10% less. I think the more I'm thinking about this out loud, which is why this discussion is so important today, is there's just so many nuances. And you know, the more I think about it, is that if you're at 90 pitches and you're expected to throw 90 pitches or 75 pitches in 4 weeks, you probably really can't change a thing. Just keep going. Now, you may say, well, the coach only needs me to throw 30 pitches that first game, and then 45 the next, and then 60. They're going to build me up. That's a new scenario. I'd say, okay, well, then maybe deload a little bit more than I said for a couple of weeks, and then use a couple of weeks to sort of ramp back up. But it gives you, it borrows time for you to start to give your arm a chance to recover and refresh a bit, and then reload 4 weeks from now. But again, this is why this topic is so nuanced, because now it depends on, well, 4 weeks from now, am I expected to throw an inning? Am I expected to throw 75 pitches? Am I expected to throw a complete game? And so, which we'll call 90 pitches. So I think the simplest answer is, for the most part, you probably just keep going through those 4 weeks and you just keep training. Because even if they tell you you're only going to throw 30 pitches, if you're at 90 pitches, that also could shock the arm a little bit. Like, how do you go from 90 down to 30? Like, it makes sense on one level that, oh, well, this is going to be good for my arm because I can let it refresh itself. And maybe part of that's true. But that to me could be call up another danger, which is, well, can I deload from 90 pitches down to 30 in 4 weeks and do that safely? That's another tricky scenario. So that's why I love this conversation. There's just so many nuances.
Yeah, and then the reverse to that would be, we had a starting pitcher that maybe in the summer is going to be more of a reliever. So that's another scenario that I could see that's out there, or maybe a relief pitcher that to starter. Those scenarios flip and flop as they change from maybe their high school or college team to their summer college team or their travel team, and the role and how they're used could vary.
Yeah, and then it's the same idea. Now you're talking about, if you're built up to 90 pitches as a starter and you're going to relieve. Boy, this is where this topic of deloading, which I don't think is talked about nearly enough, becomes vital. Because how do you deload from 90 pitches down to 15? Well, that's a process. You probably stay still heavy on the conditioning side, and you slowly lower your pitch count down on your bullpen side, but you have to keep the arm still super in shape, because even if you lower your pitch count as a relief pitcher, you still want the conditioning behind the arm, so to speak. So, but as you know, it's much easier going from that 90 pitch player in mid-May down to a 25 or 30 pitch relief pitcher, 4 weeks later. The other way around is not possible. You just can't. You can maybe go from a relief pitcher in 4 weeks up to, if you're really fresh, you could probably get up to 60 pitches in 4 weeks, give or take, but it's much tougher to go that way, much more difficult to go that way.
And I think that's going to hit on the importance of kind of working backward and forward, not only your current arm phase or season, but maybe looking forward and backwards. Do you want to hit on that a little bit more?
Yeah, because what happens is that when we evaluate ourselves, let's say mid to late May at the end of the season, and we start thinking about the summer, we've kind of talked a little bit about this idea of not just looking at your spring season, but the 3 months before that, maybe even the 6 months before that. So there's this story going on behind you that to me is more about 6 to 12 months to really give you an honest evaluation where you're at. So that's one thing to do, is to really go back much further than you think. And then secondly, we think about, okay, I know where I'm at and I want to navigate the summer really well. But I think what also gets lost in the shuffle is that we don't project onto the target date after the summer. So there's target dates after the summer. So the summer has its own target dates. Like travel ball might be simple because it's one big flow through the summer. Then there's showcases, right? Then there's fall ball, right? Then there's maybe where a coach expects you to be September 1st if you're in high school or college. So now you're talking about, it's not just about the summer and where I'm at in the summer, but where is the summer taking me to? And then where's the summer positioning me so that September 1st, I'm really in a space I need to be to do fall ball right, so that I'm in a position to transition into spring the right way. So it's like we're going 6 to 12 months backward, and now we're going 6 to 12 months forward. And so I think that I'm glad you brought that question up, because this is not just about where am I at right now and what does the summer look like. I mean, we can get into other things about stopping and starting in the summer and just things independent within the summer. But my goodness, we have to not only look backward beyond the spring season, but we really have to look forward, not just to September 1st, but where is September 1st putting me for October 1st, for December 1st, for February 1st of the following year? Because this is a continuum. And maybe that's a word I'm glad that just came out already, which is throwing and arm conditioning and injury prevention and optimizing your arm health and strength and endurance and recovery is all a continuum. It's 52 weeks. It doesn't mean part of that continuum isn't deloading, resting, active resting, building up in season. It's all happening. But if you, maybe this is I'm really glad this came out. If we look at this as a continuum, this is a 52-week schedule, even if that involves rest. Well, of course, it involves rest, active rest, so on and so forth. And I think if we start looking at it from that mentality, it changes the game dramatically, because now we're just not talking about a 2 or 3 month summer. We're not just talking about a 2 or 3 month spring season. We're talking about the 6 to 12 months leading up to it and the 6 to 12 months after it.
So Alan, I can see, I'll just pull a scenario that I'm very close and familiar with real quick, and we can kind of walk through a little bit around this importance of looking forward and backwards as a sample. So you got a player that built up fine in the off season. They're ready to go for high school stuff in January. Now it's May. High school's over. They've got 3 weeks here, 3-4 weeks of downtime during transition. I don't want to call it downtime, but transition in season maintenance. Then they're heading into summer. Summer's going to take them through mid-August. And then they're going to be sitting there looking at either a fall ball decision, or they're going to be looking at, they got all these prospect camps knocking on their door saying, come to me, come to my campus, come to my campus. Depending on the age and the level of the player, there's some big tournaments down in Florida in in early October. Then after that, you got November, December, things like that. So I can see what happens if it starts feeling like it's one big blended season and there's not enough rest or deload in there. You got any advice on that?
Yes, and I love that question, because you always need to have a cycle of deloading after a long season, into rest, into active rest, into buildup. That's just needs to be done. So again, whether it's the end of a long spring season, end of a long summer season, the end of a long fall season leading into the spring, at some point, you're going to need to go into a deload, into a rest, into some active rest, and into a buildup. So if you know that's coming, and let's just call that an 8-week period to do all of that, you start looking at the year differently. You're like, okay, I can do a full spring season, and maybe I can do a full summer after spring. But there's an 8 to 10 week period coming where I'm going to need to start to deload it, go into some rest, go into some active rest, and go into the buildup. And by the way, the rest period for us doesn't have to be super long. I'm not doing anything. Our rest and active rest is basically either band work and light throwing. If you want to do nothing at all during total rest, we'd still recommend probably some light band work, maybe even if it's 3 days a week. But the moral of the story is this: you start looking at the year much differently, because if you do have a heavy spring and summer, you start looking at the fact that you're about to enter an 8 to 10 week period where you're going to do this deload, rest, active rest, buildup before you even get near a mound. So now you have to say, okay, well, if an 8 to 10 week period is coming, then now where does that put me in the fall or winter? And then how does that set me up for the spring? Because as you said, you can't stay in this cycle for 52 weeks. You might have a good run for 4 months, 5 months, even 6, whatever it is. You might have a good run, but that 8 to 10 week is coming. And that 8 to 10 weeks is probably coming twice a year, right? It's probably coming after the summer. Or if you had a heavy last fall, winter, spring, then it is the summer. So now you're setting up a great fall, winter, where then you can have another, instead of 8 to 10 weeks, because you did the fall and the winter so well, it might be more like a mini 4 to 6 week deload, rest, build back up, and kind of keep the fire burning. And now you're in January, February, now you're setting up a great spring. And so this is the mentality of this year-round cycle, to where now the math wins. Your choice of like, well, I really want to be in that showcase, or I really want to play in that tournament. Great. You can choose to do anything you want. You just have to remember, this is like these beautiful long wavelengths, these beautiful long waves. They just have this nice rhythm. They kind of slowly build, build, build. They apex, and then they start to deload, deload, deload. And then the wave, we get back in the camera here again, starts to build again. And do that. But if you see this beautiful wave building, if you notice, I didn't have these choppy things in here where I kind of pitched really heavy, and then I just took a little bit of rest off here, and then I pitched heavy, took some rest off, because I'm trying to manage the next 5 months of different things going on at different times. It's not part of the flow of a normal spring or a normal summer or a normal fall. And to me, this is starting to now get to the crux of how to set up your whole year-round schedule, because now the math wins, meaning there are just things that have to be done in order to keep your arm in this nice fluid path, get the proper break, build up again properly. And this way you stay really healthy and strong. And when it's time to rest, you know when it's time to rest, but there's not this stopping and starting, which to me is absolutely one of the keys to an arm breaking down quickly and unnecessarily.
I'm going to come back to the start and stop for sure, but I think we're on this deload, rest, active rest buildup really good. So what I wanted to try to do is give a scenario that maybe just for people out there, if we can give maybe 30 seconds on each one of those, the deload, rest, active rest buildup, of truly what it is. Because there could be, just like listening to the arm, there could be somebody out there that thinks deload means just do nothing. So and then what's the difference between deload and active rest and all that. So if we could just maybe, if you want the scenario, we got our high school pitcher. He was used medium, and then he went into summer. He did real good. He pitched quite a bit, but he's deciding, you know what, this fall I need a rest. I need to kind of take it down and then ramp it back up for spring. I'm not going to do much in the fall besides work out and eat and do all that other good stuff and throw. But we're not going to do competitive showcases, or we're not going to do competitive tournaments or anything like that. What would that deload look like? Kind of defined. What's that rest? What's that active rest? What's that buildup? I know that's literally the entire book over my shoulder, but could you give us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought it up, Steve, because I say these terminology, like it's normal. And I know generally people understand these terms well, but like you said, it could be a little ambiguous. So deloading for me is, I just shifted my whole world with this concept of deloading after talking to Randy Sullivan. Shout out to Randy. Because I really wasn't that familiar with, I know as a kid growing up, you always heard about after you go for a run, stretch afterward, and it should really help your recovery a lot. And I didn't really know what all that meant, but it made sense intuitively. And I'm not saying I was great at it. I'm just saying, like, I heard that comment. And so Randy and I have had many talks, and we just go into these rabbit holes, and I just love it. And so we were talking about deload. We were basically talking about some cycles, and he mentioned he was talking about deloading, and he was talking about how critical this is. He was saying things like, after a long season, for instance, in professional baseball, they've been going since February, and technically maybe really since January, bullpens. So they're 8, 9, 10 months in if they go to the World Series. He said even then, you never want to stop. So let's say you're at 90 pitches at the end of a long season. He said even for the next 3 weeks, you want to start to just gradually back off your workload, which makes total sense. And he gave me more of the science behind it and how the body chemically works. But it's sort of like the simple analogy he kind of gave me is that it's like these, God, I wish I had the terminology, but it's like these peptides or words that were, I can't remember, but they basically they marriage, right? The fibers, I'm just, again,
Yeah.
Everybody out there is a PT, forgive me, but it's like they marriage, right? These things that communicate, they create this really strong bond. And all of a sudden you stop. The body doesn't like that, right? Body wants to kind of unwind from that bond slowly, right? You load it in a certain way. This makes sense. It's like deloading in anything in life, right? You just start. So the idea is that you start to back off gently. And look, maybe it's even 3 weeks. You start cutting down your long toss a little bit. You start cutting down your pens a little bit. Maybe you back off your real heavy intent of a pitch count in a game. But Randy said you literally, for at least 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, you slowly start to deload from even a 9 or 10th month season. You don't just stop. So that would be that scenario. So deloading for a pitcher that's just finished a long spring season or spring and summer, it might be a good 3 or 4 weeks of just slowly backing off their throwing and just, going from, 6 days a week to 5 days a week to 4 days a week to 300 feet to 240 to 220 to 180, from a lot of high intent pull downs to medium intent pull downs to light intent pull downs to no pull downs. So you're just literally undoing what you built up. It's almost like you're just doing things in reverse, like turning a movie backward, right? And then rest now is, from an old school point of view, is technically doing nothing. I mean, you're just letting the body rest and calm down and just refresh, resets. Now, I was someone that loved to throw all the time. I felt like the more I threw, the better I felt. Meaning, not necessarily on the mound and throwing curveballs. I just mean I like to throw. My arm wants to throw. I didn't necessarily feel like rest was something my arm wanted to do. Maybe after a super long season, yes, I was tired or whatever. So we throw this out there as a suggestion to just say, look, if you want to rest and do nothing for, let's say, 4 weeks, that's fine. We'd still, because you deloaded well, that's already going to help you out a ton. We'd still say, look, if you total rest for us, in other words, Steve, is 3 days a week of some light band work. I mean, yeah, I'll use still another Randy Sullivan line. The body is made to move. So just keep moving, even if it's a little bit. Now, look, if you're in season maintenance, first off, your off-season buildup was great. Your in-season maintenance was great. Your deload was great. 4 weeks of doing nothing, maybe even 6 weeks. It's probably not going to hurt you at all, as long as you have a great active rest and a buildup, which we'll talk about next. So I'm not saying you can't do nothing for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it is, but we would just say maybe a worst case scenario, unless you just mentally really need to check out and get away from training for a while, just do some light band work 3 days a week or so. So now that we're at deloading, now we're at complete rest, active rest for us. Shout out Eric Cressy. Love citing people who have taught me some great things. Now you're at active rest, which is, this might last for a pro player that's got a 5 or 6 month off season. The active rest might be 2 months worth of just ramping up band work and just starting to play some light catch. But maybe instead of 3 days a week, it's 4 days a week, it's 5 days a week, it's 6 days a week. Even if they don't break 120 feet, they're just doing some real light throwing and light band work for however long that is. So for a high school or college player, they don't have the luxury maybe of that super long off season. And look, our full buildup is 4 to 6 weeks anyway. So let's just say they active rest for 2 or 3 weeks, where they just start going from 3 days a week of light band work in the rest period to maybe it's 4 to 5 to 6. In fact, I've worked this out with parents or coaches where I basically say go 4 days a week, week 1. Like, instead of 15 reps, go up to 20 to 25 reps. Week 2 is up to 5 days a week of band work. Week 3, 6 days a week of band work. Maybe 2 sets of each exercise. Maybe start doing, instead of 15 or 20 forward throws, maybe do 2 sets of those. And the idea is now you're setting this really good base that's leading you into your first throwing. So when you go out for the first time to throw, you've got this deload behind you, you've got some real good rest that might involve a little bit of light band work. Then you've got 3 or 4 weeks of active rest where you're really starting to condition the arm and the body. And this, of course, besides the arm, you're doing other things, stretching and other things with the body to prep it. But now you're using that deload into rest, into active rest, and now you are in an ideal position to start your throwing program, which again might be 4 to 6 weeks. For younger kids, it might be 3 or 4 weeks. And then one other thing before I forget, the other good thing I love about the rest and the deload period before you actually pick up a ball is that players then might start lifting, working out, right? So another reason why it's, for us, crucial to always be doing some kind of band work is you want to counter lifting and the body maybe getting muscle mass or getting maybe a little bit tight And you don't want to shock the body that way too after your rest and active rest, and then you pick up the ball. So there's lots of reasons to have the band work and things like that during the rest and active rest, lots of range of motion stuff, so that when you do come back and throw for the first time, you have already an incredible foundation in place.
Okay. I got on here, just the concept of a mini break. And with somebody that has a potential long season, maybe these 3 to 4 weeks in here or there, maybe sprinkled right now between, high school, college, and summer, or maybe between, after summer and fall, maybe their fall's a little bit later buildup. Can you talk about what would go into what a mini break is and kind of what that would look like?
Yeah, I'd say a mini break occurs when you've come out of not a real heavy workload period. To me, the one that jumps out at me is a college player who had a pretty normal spring, pretty normal summer, nothing too extreme. Positioned himself for maybe in the fall where he could deload a bit, doesn't need to do a lot, he can rest a bit, then he can really do some buildup. And then once he does some buildup, he's not going to pitch more than 30 to 45 pitches in the fall, maybe toward the end of it. So he's sort of had a nice, almost a nice transition of backing off for maybe 3 or 4 months in the fall. And now the winter break comes after, let's say, Thanksgiving. And let's say he's got 6 weeks before he goes back to school. He doesn't need a full-on rest because he's had kind of a low-key, let's say, 3 or 4 months in the fall. And so those kind of players, I don't really want them going too far away from where they're at. I would say you could do a little mini back off from a 45 pitch pen or a game situation. Maybe back off so you work back down to like 15 to 30 pitch pen. Maybe you back off I don't really like backing off the long toss distance as much as more of the pull downs and the more of the higher intent throws. Maybe you back off that a bit, maybe you back off a day or two of throwing, but you stay very close so that maybe after 2 weeks of deloading and backing off, or even 3, those next 3 weeks are not like starting from scratch. You're basically starting from, let's call it the 80 percentile. And so you can sort of get to your long toss distance pretty quickly without rushing. Your pull downs are pretty close without rushing. You're pretty much ready for a 20, 25 pitch pen with pretty good intent within that next set of 3 weeks. So now you're back at school January 5th, and that 6 weeks is gone, and you're sort of back to, let's just call it 25, 30, 40 pitches, whatever it is, of pretty high intent again. But you use 6 weeks to sort of have a mini deload, a mini back off. But I use the analogy a lot with like fire and heat. It's like you can turn the heat down a bit and back off a bit, but you don't want to get too far from that heat, if that makes sense. Gotcha.
Next topic I got on here would be kind of that start and stop, or the word that I tend to hear thrown around the high school or travel or other things, or after the season you ask somebody, hey, what are you going to do, or what's your training plan look like between the summer and now? Well, you know what, I'm going to shut down for a while. I'm going to shut down for 3-4 weeks. I'm going to take some time off, and then we're going to get ready for the summer. What do you think about that start and stops like that?
Yeah, that's why I'm glad we covered earlier that this is a continuum. If someone wants to shut down for 4 weeks, that's great. Just know that the first couple weeks of that is going to be deloading. The next couple weeks is going to be some form of rest or active rest. And we can say it's some mini breaks, so they don't need the full 4 to 6 weeks to get back in shape. But let's say they're going to need at least 2 to 3 weeks to get back in shape for a 30 pitch pen or a 20 pitch pen. So I'm going to use this line maybe more often. The math doesn't lie. So someone can say whatever they want, but the math to me is the truth, meaning if you want to shut down for 4 weeks because you're setting yourself up for 8 weeks from now, do it. But just know that if you start the process of shutting down, which to me means you're going kind of into a rest mode, there's a deload phase, I mean, this is the math. This cannot be missed. There's a deload phase. Now that might only be a shorter period if you're ramping back up quickly. But let's call it even a week to 2 weeks of a deload, a week to 2 weeks of some rest. Or maybe at that point it's active rest because you don't really need to shut down. But you said the person wants to shut down, so I'm kind of going with that. But anyway, the bottom line is this: there's going to be a period of deload, a period of rest, a period for some active rest, and a period to build up. Now, that's an 8 to 10 week process. Now, if you want to condense it, because the season ended June 1st, and you have a showcase July 15th, 6 weeks from now, you can condense that whole process, those 4 steps. But just know that you're not shutting down at that point, right? You're sort of turning the fire down a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, turning it up a little bit, a little bit. So now you're back to square one again. But the idea of shutting down, to me, if you're going to shut down, you're telling me that you're basically at least 6 to 8 weeks away from just one good 20 pitch bullpen. Not even 20 pitches in a game yet. So that's where this gets super tricky with stopping and starting. You just have to, you have to, and look, I can see there's some questions that are gonna be hard to cover. Like someone's gonna say, okay, I finished my season, it's June 1st. I still feel pretty good. But I have a showcase October 1st, so I don't really want to keep pitching all the way to October 1st. But I don't want to shut down either. And I would say, well, that's where you're going to have someone who's going to have to choose. Like, do I want to just keep pitching for another, month and then stop playing with my summer team to start some kind of a shutdown, some kind of a deload, rest, active rest, build back up, right? So you give yourself like a month to pitch more. You give yourself, let's say, 6 weeks to kind of shut down, but you still have 6 weeks to, we're talking maybe more like 8 weeks to shut down and build back up. You can do that. You can do, like you said, these are like these mini breaks. You can do them. You just have to realize that once you start the deloading process and the shutting down process, the longer you need to do that, the longer it's going to take to build this thing back up. And the longer you take, the more you have to start from scratch, like a 15 pitch bullpen after getting into full long toss shape, which for us takes at least 3 to 4 weeks, more like 4 weeks. So that's where this math is always going to win, Steve. And I know there's just countless scenarios, but you can do whatever you want. It's just, you can't shock the arm. And hey, if you told me that June 1st, you finish your high school season, you're not going to pitch on a summer team, but you have showcases lined up for the next 4 months, perfect. Because you could do a ton of arm conditioning and arm training, and you can stay more in that 35 pitch pen, maybe twice a week. You're only going to probably throw an inning or two in these showcases. That's actually a great training mode to be in. You can actually be in a great conditioning cycle for, let's call it 4 months if you need to. And then, by the way, if you're doing a ton of conditioning and you don't have to throw off the mound a lot, you can actually do a couple of mini breaks, because you're not going to go very far away from your pitch count. So you're not going to be that far away from getting back to it. So to me, like, that's in a way one of the better case scenarios, is when you just have a bunch of showcases lined up and you're not really that tired from your spring season. Now you're just talking about, oh, I can just train for the next 4 months. But now comes the question, okay, you can do that, but then what is your fall and winter going to look like? And then what is your fall and winter going to look like leading back to next spring? So the math always wins. That's going to be the theme today. The math always wins. You can't avoid it. You have to keep thinking 6 to 12 months ahead, not just 3 months ahead.
Going back to that year-round throwing or 52-week plan. With that, what you mentioned it in there, pitching, throwing on the mound, maybe conditioning versus pitching. We can talk. Could you talk a little bit about kind of maybe how you break those two words down, conditioning versus pitching?
Yeah, I would just say conditioning versus pitching is when you want to stay in shape and you feel like you feel good, maybe you're prepping for showcases, or maybe you're throwing a couple innings on the weekend. So it's not this heavy taxing situation you're in where you got to really work around this one big day. So you're able to go into conditioning mode. You're able to just train because it's not that taxing. You know, like I said, you can throw a 35 pitch pen on a Tuesday, and on a Saturday you can throw 2 or 3 innings. You know, and you can kind of keep that rolling for probably 3 or 4 months, and you probably could feel strong. In fact, you may not want to stop after 3 or 4 months because now that's assuming someone is on a great 7-day plan where they're training, like they're throwing 6-7 days a week, and they have like a 7-day cycle in place where they know when to pen, they know when to do their 2 or 3 inning game day. They know how to long toss, they know how to build up, they know what days to pull down, what days to not pull down on. So this is assuming that someone has a pretty sophisticated 7-day cycle in place where they're training and conditioning really well. And then to me, it's sort of like have at it. I mean, I think that you could sort of stay in shape for really a long time doing it that way, because it's almost like it's 80% conditioning, 20% pitching, where I guess to answer your question, when I look at pitching versus training, I feel like the pitching is like the 80%. And then you're just kind of looking at the other 20% to just figure out the best ways to recover and then rebuild for that one big day again. And maybe the other way to answer the question is that when you're conditioning versus pitching, the workload from off the mound is so minimal in a way that you have great recovery, therefore you have great restoration, you have great rebuilding, right? You can stay in a real healthy, what we call a positive cycle. When you're more heavy loaded on that one day of pitching, you know, where you're throwing 75 to 90 pitches once a week, and you're maybe needing to throw a pen on a second day, I don't want to say you're in survival mode, because we feel like you could still, let me take that back, because you can still thrive in that situation, but you just can't condition and train quite as much because you're constantly having to focus on my start day is this day, then my pen day is that day. And those are taxing days on a 7-day cycle because I'm pitching, versus the other way is like, yeah, I'm doing some pitching, but the majority of that pie, so to speak, is built around just 80%, or is just really conditioning and training. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely does. Hey, I'm looking at my clock here. We're about 40 minutes in. There's 2 big topics out there that I think maybe just people would like to hear about a little bit more on. If you want to dive into 1 or 2 of them, we've got long toss and a mental game. I'd flip one of those words to you and see if there's anything you want to talk about with long toss, maybe in general, or with some mental game stuff.
Yeah, definitely mental game. Want to spend a little time on that. So I'd say long toss to me, well, you can go to YouTube and keyword long toss and Jaeger, and you can kind of see a 6-minute really good demonstration. Although in that video we use a shuffle. It's a long story. We want guys actually, and gals, crow hopping off of their back leg, not shuffling. But with that said, understanding the basic components of long toss, which is the stretching out phase on the way out, throwing the ball with arc gradually higher and higher, and then gradually bringing that arc down lower and lower, which we call the pull down phase. Not every day is a pull down, as you know, but the idea is that you're really listening to your arm each day. And I guess long toss by definition is really over time. Maybe it takes 4 weeks to get there, throwing 6-7 days a week, but to get to your max distance, and again, slowly building up with range of motion uphill. And then and we don't actually want players pulling down or getting high intent. We still want them coming back to the throwing partner, maybe lightly, but we don't want them coming back to the throwing partner and using any intent, or at least high intent, until they've got to their max distance. So we just have a saying, which is, when you come back into your throwing partner, whatever percentage of your normal long toss distance you're at that day, you can use that much percentage of intent. So let's say someone's a 300-foot long toss athlete, and they only got to 200 feet because either they're not in that shape yet, or they're in that shape, but it's like 2 days after their start or whatever. So you can go out to 200 feet. So 2/3 of 300 feet, of course. So you can use 66% of your intent on the way in, which is not that much. I mean, it should look more like what we call a massage throw if you're using 66% effort. And so that's another way just to kind of throw this under the whole long toss umbrella of getting in that important point. But I would just say, listen to your arm, number one, with regard to long toss in a given day. And number two, know that to get into great long toss throwing shape, it's going to take someone who's probably, let's say 16 and above, 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks to get to your max distance, maybe somebody younger, 2 to 3 weeks. And just know that the long toss concept is something that is a gradual buildup over time. And again, plan on it taking 4 weeks if you're throwing, let's say 6 to 7 days a week.
Okay. What about, I'm wearing this bracelet that you got. This used to be blue and you can see it's white, but it's got this hashtag breathe on it. You want to jump into that a little bit and tell us a little bit about the mental game?
Yeah, I do. And I'm also going to make sure you get a new breathe bracelet. Although I do know there's people that have the, what was that?
I kind of like the white one. It shows it's been around forever.
I was just going to say that people that have breathe bracelets that have lost their color, it's almost like a badge of honor, right? Like they're like, I've had this thing on for 2 years and it makes them feel good. So so no, I get it when I'm actually half joking about sending you a new one because I know you don't want a new one unless that one breaks. So
yeah.
Yeah, I would say this. Number one, we have tons of free resources online. Again, if you go to YouTube, there's a whole mental talk, 45 minutes, that actually takes you through a nice guided meditation. There's countless podcasts. I've done 2 or 3 with Jeremy Sheetinger, with ABCA and Stick and Ball. Just love those. We've done some deep dives, and those are all on our website at jaegersports.com also. I would just say this, the game between the lines at the highest level is 99.9% mental. It's probably 98% mental once you get into pro ball. It's probably 95% mental in college. And it's probably, 80 to 90% mental in high school. I would say it's more, but I know sometimes kids in high school can out physical other kids, even if they don't have, let's say, a great mental game. But it does start to, like a pyramid, it just, as you get closer to that top, it just starts to get clearer and clearer. And I would just say, anybody out there that's listening to this and has made it through, to just start looking at life from this point of view, that I'm very invested in all the physical things I do, whether it's throwing, lifting, hitting, running, stretching. The mind is ultimately the engine to the car. So every day when you wake up, I hope you have this sort of newfound insight that, what am I doing from my mind today? Just like fly balls and ground balls and hitting and lifting. And I'm talking actually more about practice. Yes, please, there's loads of great strategies and tools and motivation out there to help you with your mental game. Okay, so there's no question. There's a whole piece to the mental game, which is called game management or strategy. But to me, the biggest piece is the practice, meaning, what am I doing every day to relax my body, clear my mind, learn how to be quieter, learn how to be more in the present moment, learn how to deal better with distractions that come up. To me, these are all things that can be worked on through meditation, through breathing exercises, through relaxation. So I would just invite anybody that's listening to this to start delving into this part of the game and make this part of your path, because at the end of the day, it is the engine to the car. And so I know the other things physically are more tangible, so we can kind of feel the changes from holding a grip this way versus this way, and we're like, oh, I got better RPMs on it. So sometimes I think that the mental game gets a little lost because it feels very intangible. But I can tell you from 32 years of doing this that anytime I've taken someone through a guided meditation, it's just unbelievable how, when it's done, the feedback is so consistent. They feel more relaxed, they feel more clear-minded, they feel more in the present moment, they feel less distracted, their senses are heightened, they feel free, they feel like they're in a flow. And I would just say, oh, well, you just did a 10 or 20-minute practice that made you feel that way. Just like fielding a ground ball with your backhand instead of your forehand, you got better at that. So my point is that, well, if you want to get better at anything in life, you practice it, right? If you want to have a clearer mind, then you would practice clearing your mind every day. So I try to keep it more in those simple terms. So when people think about the mental game or what do I do, I want to make this as clear and as simple as possible. It's a practice. If you want to get better at anything, practice. If you right now, Steve, said to me, hey, you know what, I've noticed I've been feeling a little more tense lately, or my mind has been thinking a lot more often, and that's starting to stress me out. And I said to you, hey, let's do a little 5-minute breathing exercise. And all of a sudden after this exercise, you're like, hey, whether it was a little or a lot, you're like, I just am noticeably, in fact, I didn't even think about all the things I've been thinking about the last week for that 5 minutes. It's weird. And I actually don't even want to think about it right now. Like, wow. And to me, we did a practice. The practice had an effect. It's changing your neural pathways. It's changing your mind. It's changing your body. It's changing how you feel at a core level. So why would we not put time aside every day to water those plants and nurture that part of us? Especially nowadays with what we've gone through with COVID, what's happening with cell phones and video games and social media. There's a lot of distraction and a lot of distortions out there. And we're trying to be on a baseball field or softball field or any classroom. We're trying to be quiet and present so we can optimize this moment. And yet our minds are used to so much stuff. I'll say one last thing and we'll leave it at this. One of the most important qualities of the zone state, of being in the zone, is the absence of thought. So another way of saying that is having a thoughtless mind or a quiet mind. So science has showed, research shows that we have about, on average, not everybody, but the average person supposedly has about 70,000 thoughts a day. And if you went back 2,000 years, I can pretty much assure you, we didn't have very many thoughts on our mind compared to now. We were probably living more in nature, right? More flowing. And so it makes sense, like we have all this stuff going on around us, and then we're trying to get between the lines and be quiet and relaxed and focused. But our mind has so much practice at this other stuff for years. And so it makes sense to have a practice to start to, I don't know if counter that is the right word. I'd rather just say to build a new path, to become aware of what the mind is doing and how the body's feeling as a result of it. So we can start letting that go. So we can start moving into more of a quieter, clearer, more present, more flowing state. And to me, it just makes sense, right? We've practiced something for many, many years, thinking maybe a lot, being distracted a lot. And we're just trying to get to a state where we're trying to get quieter, more peaceful, more calmer, more present, more alive, more instinctive, more intuitive, more into our feel. Freedom. I think it's one of the key words also of being in the zone. There is just, you're free. And to me, it just feels like, well, how do we be in a free state if in a way our mind is keeping us in a, let's say a relatively confined or limited space? That's a good metaphor really for the importance of any kind of mental training or mental practice or meditation is, I want to be free and I want to be more spacious and I want to go with the flow. But I've spent a lot of my life, and it's no one's fault. It's just a lot of it's just conditioning, right? It's socialization. It's how we grew up. It's part of society. It's 1 second away from the phone, right? Or the TV or whatever. And so that would be sort of my little bit of synopsis on the mental game. And I just hope people that made it this far, this just starts to become something that's on the front burner. And it's like, okay, time to delve in. I can't get over how many people tag us now on Twitter with kids laying down. There were already 2 this morning, I think, or 2, 1 this morning, 1 last night. Coaches just laying kids down, talking about meditation, part of their practice now, tagging us with a picture of the kids laying down. And I feel like we're getting at least one of those a day now, where coaches are posting pictures of their kids laying down and doing the practice, and it's inspiring. So maybe we'll finish on that note, but I just want to thank you, Steve, for doing this. And really, you were the catalyst with that question on Twitter the other day. And I just hope for anybody that listens to this, this really gives them a lot more clarity and insight. Obviously, we're both available through DMs for follow-up questions, but hopefully we've got these main pieces a lot clearer, and the math is just completely understood now, that this is a continuum, and you have to look out for the 6 months forward and the 6 months backward, or even more, right? So thank you for doing this again. And I just appreciate I know how passionate you are about this, and I'm going to give you the last word, buddy, because you started this.
Well, again, Alan, thank you. I'm humbled and honored to have been able to ask these questions to you over the last 45 minutes or hour here. And honestly, you've been a great resource, not only to myself and my family and the teams that I've coached, but just a lot of people out there. So, whenever anything comes into arm health, your name is one that's mentioned right up there at the top. So again, just an honor and a privilege. I look forward to continuing this journey with you. I look forward to diving into some more of these topics in the future. I know mental game is one that we're working on right now with a 15-year-old that lives pretty close to my house. So we're working on that this summer specifically, just to try to take that up a little bit of a different level, that portion of his game too. So kind of call it the 6th tool instead of the 5 tools. So, but with that, again, thank you. I appreciate you. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Steve, thank you, man. Thanks for doing this. And we're gonna be in touch real soon, because I want to hear about that 15-year-old and that mental practice too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, brother. You be well. Have a great day.